death has had a queer way of inducing silence in many of us as well. AIDS has taken too many of us, and here I mean us in the broadest sense. But it has taken its toll on the living as well. Let me share a story with you that I've never told in a public setting. When I was a freshman, I volunteered at an AIDS hospice in Boston. I had done the first year urban program, and my FUP leaders had been Jared Barrios and Sandy Dabowski. It's a good way to start. Jared and Sandy were members of, obviously, the first year urban program, but were also members of Queer Nation. And I wanted to do my part as an ally. Keep in mind that at the time I was an ally. One of my favorite pictures, and a favorite picture of all of my friends from college, was of me wearing a straight but not narrow t-shirt. That's a collectible. And I can't fit in it, I'll tell you that. I always did have an acute appreciation for irony. Anyway, I was at this AIDS hospice and I started talking to this guy. His name was Jim, and he was very gaunt, and he was very sick. And he was in the corner room down the first hallway. And I remember having a conversation with him about dying. He knew he was going to die. He knew it was terminal. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a lesion. It's the first time I'd ever met anyone with AIDS. He had a picture of his partner by his bed. It was the first person I ever knew, ever touched, who I knew had AIDS. He's the first person I ever knew who died of AIDS. I came back the next week, very eager to see Jim, and the room was empty and clean, and the bed had been made, and there were no more pictures and no more Jim. Jim was the last person that I've known who died of AIDS. Turns out Jim was far more ready for death than I was. I retreated and found other things to do for service. It's still true that Jim was more ready for death than I'll ever be. So I'm guilty of what I'm talking about today. I worry about the toll that AIDS has taken, not just the loss of so many of our brothers and sisters, though that is a tragedy from which we will never be liberated. I mean the loss of spirit that so many in the AIDS generation have experienced, the loss of hope that characterized so many in the Stonewall generation, the loss of stories about the armies of caretakers who minister to the sick and the suffering, especially our lesbian sisters who are the unsung heroes of that age. The loss of our ability to mourn or deal with loss or death in our own lives. The loss of our concern for how AIDS continues to plague our community here and abroad. The loss of our collective sense of just how deeply we have been scarred by the fact that our history and our identity as a people has been shaped by death and the silence that produced and followed it. I can't help but think that these scars are what led a prominent queer Harvard graduate to tell me that we didn't need an AIDS panel on the program of the Harvard Gay and Lesbian 25th anniversary because AIDS, quote, isn't a death sentence for us anymore, end quote. Or when enabled an administrator at this esteemed university to tell one of my students that, quote, Harvard kids don't get AIDS. Or what possessed a gay friend of mine to say to me, AIDS is an African thing now. Perhaps AIDS isn't quite the death sentence it used to be for some people with the means to afford medicine. And perhaps AIDS is less prevalent here at Harvard than it is in other places. And perhaps AIDS is more of a crisis in Soweto than it is in San Francisco. And perhaps we will see the end of AIDS someday. Perhaps. But as long as a small boy in South Africa has AIDS, I have AIDS. As long as a sex slave in Thailand has AIDS, I have AIDS. As long as a transgender youth anywhere has AIDS, I have AIDS. As long as there is AIDS, we all have AIDS. I first experienced this kind of solidarity, spiritual connection through common struggle. A true meaning of life discovered in the midst of terrible loss when I saw Tony Kushner's epic play, Angels in America. It was the fall semester of my graduate school, first year of graduate school. Like many of us, I was blown away by that theatrical miracle. What struck me most was not the play itself, though, but the audience that had come to see it. Queers and straights alike who, like the play's main character, Prior Walter, had survived the AIDS generation. When the lights in the Walter Kerr Theater went up, I saw everyone around me in tears. These were not just the tears of damp cheeks. These were the tears of waterfalls. These were tears of loss among the living. I had only begun to understand. I had yet to cry myself. At the end of Perestroika, the second half of Angels, Prior speaks directly to us. The disease will be the end of many of us, but not nearly all. And the dead will be commemorated, and will struggle on with the living. And we are not going away. We won't die secret deaths anymore. The world only spins forward. We will be citizens. The time has come. The time has come for us to be citizens. Right now, it feels like the world is spinning forward with the swiftest cadence of inevitability. But as I try to suggest, progress is never inevitable. Rather, our victories are the product of hard work by many people over many generations. Not just the Stonewall generation, or the AIDS generation, or now the marriage generation, but all the generations before them too. We stand in the midst of a long history. As Ralph Ellison once wrote, the end is in the beginning and lies far ahead. We find ourselves at a curious moment in this history. On the one hand, our future is bright. With victories from the bench and even at the ballot box, we finally have a genuine ally in the presidency, a good and decent man, who is also the strongest supporter of LGBT rights to ever occupy the office of that office. He is not perfect. I'm the first to say it. In many ways, President Obama embodies the state of our union, far along, but not yet there. Fortunately, we are fired up and ready to go. A community blessed in some corners with ample riches, able minds, and energized activists. We are once again full of productive rage and prudent hope. But we still have many challenges, rights to protect, rights still to win. As a people, we are not yet free. Whether or not we get there will depend most of all on us. For those of us who live on the borderland of citizenship, we need not spend so much energy taking on the system that we don't have enough energy to take care of ourselves. As a people, we are not without our challenges. Too many of us would rather spend a day in the spa than a night in jail. Too few of us determine the queer agenda, and not enough of us are willing to fight for it. We have more divas than heroes. We don't know enough about our history, and many of our leaders and celebrities have lost touch with their roots, animated more by jet setting than by justice. The Stonewall generation thinks the marriage generation needs to get over itself, and the marriage generation thinks the Stonewall generation should get off its high horse. We still don't know what to do with AIDS in that generation, and we still have AIDS. The fags are from Mars, and the dykes are from Venus. We diss the bis and throw the trans folk under the bus. There's still too much mutual distrust between white queers and queers of color. Much of our community remains in the closet, often for very legitimate reasons. And somewhere along the path to liberation, we confused it with the aisle to the altar. Indeed, the marriage generation is really at a crossroads for us as a people. To be honest, I've always been uncomfortable with the concept of marriage equality, and that's not just because everyone would marry me. I know that marriage only has a narrow appeal because we get outside of our bubbles and silos, you find that out pretty quickly. And I know that marriage equality, and I know most of us know that marriage equality, marriage itself is an institution that reinforces inequalities of rights, of property, of privilege, of social status, of a sense of self. And while I too wept when gays and lesbians were married in California and Massachusetts and Connecticut and Vermont and the list goes on, and now Iowa, I resist the temptation to think that equality can only come in being just like straight people. That's not liberation, that's imitation. I mean, what's the worst thing that happened since the historic Goodrich decision here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? The Goodriches got divorced. This is not to say that CJ and I aren't going to get married someday. Indeed we may. Maybe sooner than either of us thinks. But we will do so not merely because we have the right to marry each other, as wonderful as that is, but because we love each other, for better or for worse, rich or poor, for as long as we both are lucky to live. You see, there's a difference between love and rights. From my perspective, true human equality, a liberation that lasts, resides in the former and not just the latter. Queers were never meant to be just like straight people. Indeed, the word queer, so often maligned, so often divisive, has actually had many meanings in many cultures. And those meanings and those cultures have changed over time, just like the people they sought to define and contain. I was particularly struck, thanks to my dear friend Elliot Crosse Freeman, who tracked down two very curious etymological findings today from the Oxford English Dictionary. I was struggling to figure out how to end this. The first is a 16th century German word, queer. I'm probably, I'm an American studies guy, I probably learned that. Anyway, it was a 16th century German word, Q-U-E-R, that meant across from, or traverse. And the 19th century Irish English derivation, quar, Q-U-A-R-E, when used as an intensifier, means excellent, good in quantity and quality. And since I'm a particularly intense Irishman, I am partial to the second definition. But let me try my hand at synthesis. Perhaps instead of trying to be normal, or just like straight people, we queers should become more comfortable with our place across from them. Perhaps if both of us become more comfortable in our own skins, if we find a way to love each other, we will be able to see that both are excellent and good in quantity and in quality. So we are queer, and we are here to stay. We are a people. We are full of life. We are strengthened by loss. And we are ready to love. We are Stonewall's children. We stand on the shoulders of giants, descended from our own kings and our own queens. And some of those queens wore heels.
48 hours ago, he stopped by my office and said, "I really don't have it together yet." Extraordinary. My friend Jackie O'Neill stunned me a couple of years ago by saying, "You know, Joe, you've become an icon down at the Kennedy School now." So as a Kennedy School icon, let me take that privilege to say what an honor and what a privilege it is for this school, for this faculty, to have hosted this year's Nicholas Papadopoulos lecture, just delivered so wonderfully, so movingly, so thought-provokingly by your lecturer and ours and my good friend Tim McCarthy. Need more of this everywhere. So let me, please, humbly be the first, I think, at least to get in the earliest invitation on behalf, again, of the Kennedy School to host this lecture again next year. It would be, again, an honor and a privilege. And to make it the gem in the crown of a day such as today on human rights. So I submit that. I trust you will join us, as many of you as possibly can, for the forum at 6 o'clock, featuring Lance Black. And please, the people in this room, please feel yourselves invited graciously to join us, invited enthusiastically to join us in the Malkin Penthouse in the Litauer end of this quad, immediately after the forum for a reception. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you at the forum.
The thing is that I have arranged, being the intense Irishman, I conned the Irish owners of Daedalus, who have just opened their roof deck but have not yet made it available to the general public, to allow us to convene there this evening after 11 o'clock. So
yes,
Thanks again, Tim. Tim has agreed to do some question answer. Is that right? Yeah. Did you change your mind? And also, again, just to extend that invitation, we won't make that announcement again at the next event because the reception is actually the Nicholas Papadopoulos reception and has a lot to do with the next event here tonight, but really is targeted for this group to engage, again, more about this topic. For those of you who can stay, and Tim, maybe for the next 10 minutes, we can do some question and answer. And because it's such a large room, either please use the microphone, which I will try to get around to you, or just, as Dean McCarthy did, really project. Jake.
Thanks. Hey, Tim. I'm curious to get your reaction to Congressman Carr-Ryan this week talked about potentially introducing an omnibus bail rather than take a piecemeal approach federally, or we do hate crime and repeal a bill by Department of Immigration Act to do one bill that's sort of like an LGBT Civil Rights Act, similar to the 64 Civil Rights Act. I just wanted to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm all for omnibus bills, but as a historian, I know that omnibus bills are very rarely passed through Congress. I love the idea. Jared Polis is an example down with the Kennedy School, is an example of an not just an ally, a member of our community who's in Congress, who's developed a very high profile very quickly, which I'm thrilled about. And, so yeah, take it on, and those of us who can support in any way we can. I'm not optimistic that they're going to have the votes to do this. And when we think about the battle over ENDA, the battles that are already taking place before legislation even gets put on the floor for a whole range of things, whether national intel and so forth, we can't be too optimistic about that. But I think it's a symbolic act. I do think that there's a lot of energy right now. I think we need to be careful about how we ride that energy on this, honestly. Because one of the things that I see happening, and the movement has been pretty good strategically about placing energy in places where they think they can win or where they got a shot to win. You know, and I'm an idealist, I'm an activist. I would love to just, storm the castle and take it over and have a great party and everybody's free. That's not going to happen, and that approach doesn't work politically, right? So we have to be, I think, very strategic about how we go about that. The other piece of that that's important, and this is going to be a challenge for the president. As Susan mentioned in my introductions, and many of you know, I worked on the campaign. I was an early supporter of his, and I was on his LGBT advisory council. And he's great in a lot of ways, right? He's not where he needs to be, where we want him to be on the earth, the movement wants him to be on the earth. But he's movable, and he's an ally. He really is. And I think we need to recognize that. I think too often, and I've been one of these people, I think too often we ally ourselves in opposition all the time, and we can never work with anybody who's on the inside, who's in power, because we don't trust it. I think we need to give him an opportunity to disappoint us. Because I think he is an ally. But that kind of bill is going to require the president's movement, right? I mean, the civil rights legislation in the 1960s, the movement did amazing things to get it on the docket, and there was lots of wrangling in the legislature. But at the end of the day, Johnson supported that legislation, right? He supported that legislation, and that was very important. He was willing to put his neck out there. One of the great speeches that doesn't get taught often enough is his speech where he adopts, some said we appropriate, the language of the movement, we shall overcome, speaking to Congress, right? That moved Congress, right? I mean, it was a battle still, but Obama's going to need to step out there. Whether or not this is strategically the best thing to test him this early, I don't know. But I'm optimistic that we're going to see some stuff move at the national level. It may not be an omnibus bill, but we're going to see some movement at the national level on issues that are important to us.
Great. There's a question up here, next.
Hi. Hello.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. That was an excellent lecture. Thank you. My name is Kerry Johnson. Right now I work at the Fenway Institute, but I had graduated here at Fenway Community Health. Yay. So my question is, and I am part of the AIDS generation, so meaning that I'm 46 years old, I was inspired by my friends dying, it's oriented me into a professional queer career, I do HIV prevention research. And so my question though is, often I think of my particular generation, there was a lot of activation that came out of the AIDS crisis, and now there's this sense that we somehow need to re-energize or re-galvanize and kind of reactivate the queer community. And at the same time, I don't know if that's really where the culture and the community are. And I was just wondering if you had any comments about what do you think could be our future, our recent and maybe long-term future around this idea of a queer community, a queer culture in the U.S. and maybe around the world.
Yeah, well, 2 minutes or less. I mean, one of the things that I am really inspired by, especially with my undergrads, is the degree to which they are already involved in this kind of activism on a whole range of issues. And many of them, several years ago, there was a very, very active movement around trans issues to get Harvard's non-discrimination policy changed to include gender identity and exclusion. And that was part of a movement that galvanized not just trans folks on campus, but the whole queer and ally community. And so we're seeing, students either through individually through internships or, summer employment or term time service, doing lots of things in the community, lots of queer work. Whether or not this generation has one issue that they're galvanized around, that's not the case. I don't think that's ever been the case. We need many people working in many different fronts. The public health issue, though, I think is something that needs to be reactivated as an issue with folks who are at institutions of privilege like this. As I mentioned in the talk, there is often a sense that happens out there. There's often a sense that AIDS is an African thing. That's literally one of my girlfriends said to me once. And I see this, not students actually being as explicit in saying that, but there is a sense that somehow AIDS is no longer a problem, right? That's one of the reasons why I talked about it in the talk, because I do think it still is, and obviously you're still actively engaged in that work. We don't need to reactivate you. What we need to do is expose them to the work that's being done. One of the things that I think is very important, and this gets back to one of the reasons why we have this day, and why I'm, spend a lot of time, my free time, as Susan called it, being whatever role model is. I don't think the role model is the right word, but being someone that at least students know is in the community. Right? We have some really amazing people in this community that I'll call them role models for our young people. And at the end of the day, young folks, students, undergraduates, Kennedy School students are yearning for some kind of direction or some kind of support. They already have the direction in some cases. I have lots of students here at Kennedy School that have already done policy work and work on queer issues that I've never even thought about. They're teaching me things. Right? And what we need to do as sort of adults in the community is to provide structures of support, try to marshal finances and funding, to channel that in their direction and give them every possible mechanism so they can flourish. Right? And I think that one of the things that can happen is that the universities can become places where we're doing a kind of research and intellectual work that can collaborate and intersect with the work that the students are doing in the term time and over the summers and when they leave here, but also the work that people like you are doing out there in the field. But one of the things that I'm committed to at the Carr Center is to try and figure out a way to bring the research, the academic, the teaching folks together with the activists and the advocacy folks and have the students be in the middle of that. That's a fertile, vital ground for a reactivation of a whole range of energies channeled at all the things that our community needs energy channeled at. Yeah.
Hi, hello, my name is Jimmy Lippert. I'm from the Graduate School of Education. And I think you actually pretty much answered my question with that. It's kind of a comment on the Graduate School of Education. I feel there's been really a void of any discussion like this. And I'd like to extend an invitation that if we could have you come speak at some time. I really think we need that activist.
Yeah. Well, funny you should mention it. Because we met a group of us, a couple of graduate students from the Ed School, a couple of graduate students from Kennedy School, Arthur Lipkin, former professor at the Ed School, is a leading scholar in LGBT education issues, Jennifer Bryant, who's an educator and consultant, Tina Flanoy, who's head of the American Federation for Teachers, is an IOP fellow here this term. She brought her colleague David Sherman, who was one of the people who helped to spearhead the Rainbow Curriculum Initiative in New York in the late 80s and early 90s. It was a curriculum, unfortunately, that didn't get through the public school system, but what would have transformed the school system. And one of the things that curriculum was doing, and we're trying to re-energize some interest around, is a developmental approach to education. And when we talk about LGBT issues in education, we're always talking about diversity. Right? We need to be talking about development. We need to be talking about what's appropriate in terms of talking about gender and sexuality for kids from pre-K through higher education. What are schools safe, not only from bullying, but for teachers to be role models and be out themselves. My partner has just launched a charter school in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And he's African-American, it's a predominantly African-American community, and one of the poorest communities in Brooklyn. And he's the dean of school culture, so he's the liaison to the parents. And we joke all the time, he was like, yeah, when you come to school, you're going to be my good friend Tim. Right? And we joke, and he's pretty out. You'll see him later on tonight, he's pretty out. And I am too. And we're out in New York. And we're out in Brooklyn, right? We're in Brooklyn doing our thing. And one of the things that he struggles with is, how do I do this? Not only how do I be out as an educator, how do I be out as an African-American educator in the African-American community? Right? These are all issues that we never talk about. Right? He went to the Ed School. They never talked about him there. He and I have had more conversations about this in the last 2 weeks since our meeting with Tina Flanoy than he did the entire time he was at the Ed School doing an individualized program. Right? And so these issues are now on the table. Fortunately, what we're trying to do through the collaboration with the Carr Center, the Ed School, the Kennedy School, and the AFT is to develop a policy initiative called Safe Schools, Healthy Schools, Public Schools that we are going to put on the desk of Arne Duncan, who is the Secretary of Education under Obama, who has more money than anybody, any education secretary has had in the modern period. One of the cool things about this that I didn't know is not only that Tina met with him last week and planted the seed, but I just got invited to a private cocktail party with Arne Duncan because he and I are both alums of the Harvard basketball program. He played ball, so did I. And so, hey, you come at this, how do you come at this, right? And so I'm going to go have cocktails with Arne Duncan, and I'm going to plant the seed from the other direction, and hopefully we're going to have some researchers here this summer working with us to produce this policy memo that we're going to put on the desk in the fall, I hope, to the Secretary of Education. try and move this a little bit, but you're right, there needs to be more work on this. And I'm happy to come speak with you.
One here and one over there. Right here.
I hope he doesn't ask me to like play horse or something. That's going to be very embarrassing. So yeah.
You spoke a lot about AIDS and the messianic expectations we have from the president, and how we should give him a little time to disappoint us. So it got me thinking about the HIV AIDS travel ban, immigration ban. And right now I can't think of anything else in the whole American legal structure that's saying more, screaming more up there, okay, this is not our problem, it's coming from abroad, you people are biological weapons of mass destruction, we don't want you here. And what this says about the people who are American citizens and are living with this, what message this gives about what their position would be in society. And as far as, if I'm not mistaken, that's not expecting any state legislation to vote for anything, that doesn't require the president to intervene, or Congress. It was a battle that was already won during the Bush years of all things, just waiting for a Department of Health meeting for people to take off the list. So is this already the first disappointment that's coming up? Already months of waiting and nothing?
Yeah, absolutely, it is. You know, you're right. I have been very, you know, one of my friends accused me as, God, you not only drank the Kool-Aid, you're making the Kool-Aid with Obama. And, you know, and I'll admit to that. I'm hardly the only one guilty about sin. You know, I've spent my entire career working on behalf of, working for racial justice, and so my whole life studying race and social movements and the African-American freedom struggle. And I will admit that I'm still coming down off that high. And it's a pretty good high. It's the best high I've had in years because I stopped smoking pot years ago. You know, so I'm probably a little bit slower to that curve. You're right, that is a big disappointment, and it does need some initiative at the top. The problem is right now, too, and this is not an excuse, but the fact of the matter is that everybody's coming at him for everything, to do everything immediately. Right? And he's already set up an ambitious agenda out. It includes some of the things that our community wants. It doesn't include everything. I agree that needs to be overturned, got rid of. You're right. It sets a troubling, a dangerous precedent, not only what message we're sending globally at a time when we're trying to resurrect our global image, but it also tells folks in this country what kind of second-class status they have within the structure of citizenship here. So it's actually doubly terrible. And I agree it needs to be overturned immediately. If I were president, we would. Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there an echo in here?
Yeah. There's two. Yeah, right there and then.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I really appreciate the point you made about that the emphasis on coming out can actually sort of create a lot of judgment within the community of people who haven't yet come out. But one thing I guess I'm wondering is, if we're trying to create, I guess, a gay solidarity and a gay community, what is the alternative to the emphasis on coming out? Especially, I think, hearing more and more that people not only feel they're out, but are feeling that they're actually post-gay.
Yeah, well, I mean, post-gay is like post-racial, really? Yeah, the whole post-everything, just, I mean, even postmodernism, I'm like, although I did read a thesis that had a particularly lucid synthesis of postmodernism that I actually copied and stuck in a drawer if I ever need it. But to your point, I would never, anybody would come to me and say we're post-gay or post-AIDS or post-racial, I would have a very long conversation, and that's when I turn into Gorbachev. But the second point, the more serious and important point, is that I think we express solidarity by making ourselves available and visible as people who are affirming to all folks. Right? I say all the time, when I get up and have meetings with students at the beginning of the year, I talk, I'm the BGLCS advisor at Quincy House, the masters of Quincy House, who are remarkable allies, are here. When I get up at our first meetings, I always say, you know, when I was your age, I was straight too. And it's always a sort of nervous laughter, especially some of the hockey guys. And again, I was a basketball player. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But I tell my story about coming out all the time. I tell that story and I talk about that struggle. And I tell students all the time that I was straight in college, that I was in the closet. I talk about being suicidal. I talk about drinking too much. I talk about all the things that I did. It was a long, painful, awful journey. And I also talk about the fact that I'm not out to my grandparents, for instance. Right? I'm here. My grandparents Googled. They would be able to figure out. I mean, Lord knows how many friggin' emails about the Papadopoulos lecture went out this week, right? They would be able to find that out pretty quickly. I'm not out to everybody, right? And I think we need a spectrum. We need a much more complicated understanding about what that means. I, as a BGLTS advisor, meet, if I were to say percentage-wise, I meet with a lot of students. You know, Marco Chan's here, who's one of the co-chairs of the QSA. I love Marco. I always tell everybody I want to put Marco in my pocket, just take him around. He's too fabulous for words. But not everybody's Marco, right? I talk to Marco all the time. I love Marco. But 80% of the kids that come talk to me in my office are not out. And some of them are suicidal. And some of them get referred to me because Sarah Kimmel, who's a BGLTQ mental health worker, psychologist at the UHS and the Bureau of Study Council, she will sometimes tell students to come find me, or I'll tell people to go find her, or Susan Ring, or Paul McLaughlin, or a whole host of us that are in the community, John Page. Folks who are in the community who are affirming and who are not trying to say, like, if you come to us, we're going to dress you up with a boa and, you know, or give you whatever, a tool belt, whatever you want, you know, and we're just going to send you out there, right? We're going to send you out there and you're going to be gay and lesbian and trans, and then once you come to my office, it's like transfer, it's like a car wash, right? That's not what we're doing. And I think that people know that. Like, people know that. I think we need to be as out as I am and as visible as I am. Whenever I talk to students, I tell that story. And I always include this in what I say, because I think it's a problem for our movement. The majority of our community is not part of our community. One more, sorry.
Yes.
Arthur. Yes. Although you and I can talk over coffee.
Well, yeah, but I just have to say that one thing that could bring some of those people who are lurking on the margins to feel better about themselves, whether they come out explicitly or not, is if this university, the Ed School, the Kennedy School, the college, were to include issues of sexuality and gay and lesbian and bisexual people in history and culture and literature and so on in the serious business of the university. And not that this isn't a serious afternoon or day, but it is a bit of tokenism, you know, it's a bit of an afterthought. I'm glad we've come this far, but if they recognize that this is part of the fabric of the university on a day-to-day basis and not something that's just given a little boost every now and then, it could make a big difference. I just wanted to comment on the history part of what you were talking about today, not so much the current activism and where we go from here politically and so on. And that is that as a member of the Stonewall generation who took, I don't know, a dozen years after Stonewall before he finally was able to synthesize some of that into his own public life, private life either for that matter, I went back to last summer, I guess, to try to understand better the pre-Stonewall history and some of the giants you were talking about, and read Jim Sears's book, Behind the Mask of the Mattachine, which I recommend that people dip into. It's a bit of a slog, and there's, you know, a bit too much information perhaps, but a wonderfully documented book. And what I took away from it was really very empowering, because I recognized that the internecine warfare in that pre-Stonewall generation among the Harry Hayes and the Kepners and all the others made the petty quarrels that we have today look like nothing. And it was an important lesson for me to learn that, you know, we look back in history, we tend to sort of idealize what these figures were up to, that somehow they were all united in their vision and that they developed these strategies and that they may have had some little flaws, but some of these people were seriously flawed folks, and they were at each other's throats half the time, and God knows how we got as far as we did. So I just would encourage everybody who may be occasionally discouraged after going to a community meeting or some other political event that not everybody's on the same page, we don't seem to have the same priorities, we don't think of gay the same universal way, to look back at the pre-Stonewall Mattachine period and take heart because it's thus has it ever been, and we just go forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Arthur. That's Arthur. The 2 quick points. One is that I always tell people that you got to be in the belly of the beast to give it indigestion. And I've been giving Harvard indigestion for a long time, and I enjoy doing it. And there's a big bottle of Pepto-Bismol somewhere around here because I'm still around. But the truth is that there are actually quite a number of us giving Harvard indigestion here. I have wonderful colleagues at the Women's Center. I have wonderful colleagues in women's studies, studying women, gender, and sexuality. University Hall, dare I say it, is a family affair these days. And so there are, I think, there is a percolating energy here around these issues. And of course, then there are all these amazing students. Amazing, amazing students. And I opened up by thanking them. And so there is a lot of energy here, and I agree that the ed school could be doing more, and the Kennedy School should be doing more, and all these places should be doing more, and we're building that, and there is, I think, real motion there. And I'll be dragged out of here kicking and screaming, that's for sure. The second piece of it about the internecine battles of that pre-period, everybody, this is one of the things I think is that as a historian, not just as a gay person who's interested in my history, but as a historian, it's very, very important that we not overly romanticize it. It's one of the reasons why I sort of set up some of this stuff and then kind of tried to undo it, because the romanticizing of Stonewall, the romanticizing of anything, is just that. It's romantic, and it's not historical in any real sense. Some of those folks were nasty. They were terrible people, right? And some of the battles we're having are, really, it's like, no, I like peas, no, I like corn, and some of the arguments we're having are much more serious and require some real misogyny, no question. But those early periods, I think, are very instructive for 2 principal reasons. One is that there was an earlier period, and there's a lot going on there. And especially for the younger folks who don't really know much, don't even know Stonewall is, much less anything before it, understanding that there's a long history of this, that we stand, as I said, in the midst of a long history, is very, very important. But the other thing is to use history to instruct, right? Learn from the grace of God go on. If we don't know history, we're destined to repeat it. It's a cliche, but it's absolutely true, which is why we need historians. And so the point you make, I think, is really quite important. And we have certainly challenges in our community. I kept calling us a people, and I will continue to do that, right? But I will always speak to family, even if family won't speak to me. And that's my promise, that's my contract. And as long as I'm still breathing, that's what I will do. So thank you all very much for coming.